Scientists just sequenced Mesolithic Britons' DNA. What they found shocked everyone. In 1903, workers in Gough's cave pulled out a human skeleton that had been sitting there for around 10,000 years. And for more than a century it waited for science to catch up. The old picture of Britain's first people looked familiar on purpose: pale skin, rough furs, blank stare. Basically a school poster trying to make prehistory look like modern Britain with worse lighting. But the DNA didn't just redraw one face. It broke the whole opening story. Because Britain may not begin with one clean founding people at all, and the people who built its first world were almost not once, but twice, and you might be carrying the only traces left of them. Cheddar Man came back dark to black-skinned, blue-eyed, with dark curly hair. And newer genomes from Gough's cave and Kendrick's cave point to two different ancient worlds meeting at the edge. So who were the first Britons? And why does the oldest British DNA already tell a split story? First, the lab had to prove this skeleton still carried receipts. The bone that kept the receipts. Ancient DNA in Britain should be a mess. The climate is wet, bones break down fast, and old human remains pick up contamination from soil, microbes, and modern handling. So for a long time, prehistoric Britain looked like the exact place where the real story would rot away before anyone could read it. What changed was one piece of anatomy, the petrous bone. It's the densest bone in the human body, tucked inside the skull near the inner ear. And in ancient remains, it often protects far more original DNA than almost anything else. That is why Cheddar Man matters so much, because this wasn't just an old skeleton in a cave. He turned into the original Atlantic time capsule, a body that kept enough signal for scientists to stop guessing and state. When researchers sequenced him, they got one of the oldest near-complete human genomes from Britain. And once Starcar and other Mesolithic remains entered the picture, this stopped being a one-body curiosity and started looking like a population story. The phenotype receipts cut straight across the school poster version. Man carried the older versions of the two main genetic switches that control skin tone. Versions that haven't flipped to the lighter variants we see in Northern Europe today. While the signals for blue eyes were there too. The same genome also pointed to dark, likely curly hair. And he did not carry the later lactase persistence variant that lets many adults digest fresh milk. Put that on screen beside the old reconstructions, and the mistake gets obvious fast. People kept repainting prehistory to look more like the country they already knew, because that felt intuitive. But the DNA pushed back and redrew the face from the inside out. That appearance also wasn't some weird exception. It fit a wider early European pattern. A scientist looking up from a computer screen, their face illuminated by a map of ancient migration routes. Cheddar Man tells you what one early Britain looked like, but the newer work asks something bigger. Was early Britain one population spreading across a new land? Or were different groups already crossing paths there before Britain was even an island? When Britain wasn't an island yet? To answer that, you have to delete the map you probably have in your head. After the Ice Age, Britain was still joined to mainland Europe by Doggerland, a huge low-lying plain that is now under the North Sea. So people didn't need boats to reach Britain. In many cases, they could just walk. That changes the whole frame. Early Britain stops looking like a sealed edge of Europe and starts looking like a corridor. And once the genomes stack up, it looks even stranger. Not one founding tribe, but a battleground of two worlds. The clearest contrast comes from Gough's cave in southwest England and Kendrick's cave in North Wales. DNA linked the Goff's Cave individual to Magdalenian-related ancestry tied to groups near the end of the Ice Age, while Kendrick's Cave points more toward later Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. That's already a split, but the split doesn't stop at genes. Their diets are split too. One world leaned heavily on deer and other large land animals, while the other pulled much more from the sea. And that matters, because this is not one people with tiny local quirks. These are different lifeways, different food webs, different ancestry receipts, all inside early Britain. Western hunter-gatherers were not native from nowhere Britons rising out of the soil. They were a later population moving through a landscape that still connected Britain to the continent. And as forests spread and wetlands filled in, places like Starcar show the kind of world they built mobile camps. Red deer moving through woodland. People tracking game across a land still changing after the ice pulled back. This also clears up the appearance issue. Dark skin in early northern Europe is not some glitch that needs explaining away. It shows up in real Mesolithic genomes, and lighter pigmentation rises later under different conditions. So blue eyes with dark skin aren't contradictory at all. It's only strange if you assume modern trait bundles have always gone together the same way. And then comes the first overwrite. These Mesolithic people are the first Britons we can sequence well. But they are not the main ancestors of later Briton, because around 6,000 years ago, early farmers with mostly Anatolian-related ancestry reached Britain and replaced most of that older hunter-gatherer gene pool. Not all at once, not in one dramatic scene, but clearly enough that the genetic shift is impossible to miss. So the first Britons were already migrants, and even within that early layer, Britain held more than one story. Just as hunter-gatherers were settling into forests, wetlands, and coasts, another population was already moving across Europe with farming. And that shift would end the Mesolithic world in Britain. Then, long after that, it happened again. The Great Replacement. By the time farming had taken hold, you might expect the story to settle down. It doesn't. Around 4,500 years ago, Britain changed again, and this is the second bomb in the DNA. Beaker-associated people carrying large amounts of steppe ancestry arrive, and within a fairly short span in genetic terms, they replace about 90% of the existing Neolithic gene pool in Britain. Sit with that for a second, because the scale is the story. The older hunter-gatherer layer had already been mostly absorbed by incoming farmers. And now the descendants of those farmers are themselves pushed aside so hard that most of their ancestry drops out of later British genomes. If you grew up with the idea that some stable native population sat underneath everything else, this is where that picture falls apart. The genomes don't show one battle, one king, or one dramatic afternoon where a people simply vanish. What they show is a demographic event, across burials from before and after the shift. The ancestry profile changes so sharply that you can see the turnover in the data itself. Britain doesn't just pick up a few newcomers. Britain gets repopulated on a massive scale. Why it happened at that scale is still harder than showing that it happened. Bigger incoming populations fit. Control over land fits. Disease fits. Unequal status between groups fits. So does uneven intermarriage, where one population contributes far more ancestry than the other over time. But the genomes do not hand you one clean motive with a label on it, and pretending they do would be fake certainty. There is another detail hiding inside this turnover that people often get backwards. Farming changed food long before genes fully caught up to that new diet. The lactase persistence variant, the one that lets many adults digest fresh milk easily. was not already standard when the first farmers arrived, and it did not suddenly appear with them fully formed. It spread later. So when people imagine ancient farmers as milk-drinking villagers, who already looked and ate like later Northern Europeans, they're compressing thousands of years into one cartoon. This second overwrite matters because it breaks the lazy version of the origins talk. You can't point to the first hunter-gatherers and call them the permanent base layer, because most of their ancestry was replaced. You can't point to the first farmers and call them the permanent base layer either, because most of their ancestry was replaced too. Britain's early population history is not one founding moment stretching forward unchanged. It is movement, replacement, and mixing, repeated enough times to wreck the idea of a single original people. Even so, overwrite does not mean perfect erasure. Ancient layers don't survive in equal amounts, and they don't survive everywhere the same way. But some of them do survive. That's where the story turns from who disappeared to what stayed. What survived into you? Mesolithic ancestry did not drop to zero and vanish like a light switch. Small traces still persist in later populations in Britain and Ireland, even after the massive changes that came with farmers and then with Beaker-associated groups. The old layer got reduced hard, but not removed completely. And that matters, because population history is almost never as neat as replacement headlines make it sound. Those traces also sit inside a much messier stack than most people realize. After the big prehistoric turnovers came later waves and mixtures, Iron Age populations, Roman-era movement, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, and more regional drift on top of that. So when you look at people in Britain and Ireland today, you're not looking at one ancient source preserved intact. You're looking at a long-running blend where older ancestry survives in bits, mixed through later history. That is part of why Britain and Ireland can share deep layers and still diverge later. Some ancient components sit underneath both, but the later recipe changes from place to place. And those later mixtures shape the differences people notice now. So when someone goes looking for the one true original population behind a modern map, the genetics keep refusing to cooperate. There are also careful hints, not big cinematic claims, that some hunter-gatherer variants may have helped with immune response or local adaptation. That kind of survival is plausible, and ancient DNA keeps getting better at spotting it. But the honest version stays narrow here. We can see ancestry survive. We can sometimes see traits linger. We cannot turn every surviving fragment into a tidy story about why it won. Cheddar Man ends up doing two jobs at once. He is the punchline to a bad old image of prehistory, and he is also a warning about how easily people repaint the past to resemble themselves. The first Briton many people pictured was never the first Briton the DNA described. And even the phrase first Briton gets slippery once the genomes reveal multiple incoming groups, overlapping ancestries, and later overwrite on a huge scale. So the bigger point is not that identity is fake, or that ancestry means nothing. It means ancestry is historical, layered, and unstable over long stretches of time. People move, populations mix. Sometimes one group overwrites most of another, and still does not erase it fully. The oldest British DNA makes modern identity arguments look very recent, and that may be the most useful thing it tells. The first Britons didn't match the myth, didn't drink milk, and didn't leave behind most of the ancestry people expect. Britain begins with migration, then gets rewritten, and then rewritten again. Those are the receipts. If you want more stories where ancient DNA tears apart modern certainty, subscribe. And send this to someone still picturing prehistory as a lineup of pale cavemen in animal skins.